Thank you so much for joining us. I hope y'all are having some time to recover after the chaos of having your boss in district and state over the August recess, getting a little bit more back to the normal grind of things now that the September legislative session has started. I see some familiar faces, but let me introduce myself again. As usual, I'm Ann Meeker, Deputy Director of POPVOX Foundation, former caseworker, former Director of Constituent Services, huge casework nerd. And I am delighted that you joined us today for this topic that I know can seem super technical, super intimidating, but as I hope we're going to cover today, as super relevant for casework, both in anticipating some of the changes that will impact your casework going forward, identifying ways that your casework expertise, what you hear from constituents can contribute to Congress's role in this moment. And then also just thinking about some ways that this emerging technology can help your team build capacity, hopefully get some hours back in your day to continue doing the great work that you always do. So as always, for the last few of these meetings, we've done this specifically as a meeting so that we can actually have a little bit of a conversation. So again, even though we're a small group today, I hope that we will have lots of time for Q&A, and just really please feel free, jump in, ask questions. Feel free on camera, off camera, however is best for you. And we will go ahead and get started. So as we said, today we're going to do some kind of meta level thinking about the big picture role of casework in legislatures, but we are definitely going to spend some time on the specifics. We're going to do some demos. We're going to play with some of these tools and actually think about together, how can they work? How can they be useful for congressional office, for congressional casework operation? And just full disclosure, I've done a version of this talk a few times for legislative staffers, for state level legislative staff. So I really today want to take the time to dive in specifically for caseworkers, as with everything that we do with this program. I'm really thinking about just what is the utility for you? What is the impact for you? What are the role specific questions that you have? So again, please feel free to jump in if you have specific questions, use cases, concerns. We are here to talk about your role and your work today. So let's start out by actually talking through what is AI. I am not a technical person. The last math class I took was in junior year of high school. I've been blissfully math-free ever since. So just by nature, by background, when I hear about something like generative AI, my first instinct is that is too technical for me. I don't know what that is. I'm going to ignore this until I'm absolutely forced to pay attention to it. So if you are anything like me and have been ignoring this, we're here to talk about a version of AI explanation that makes sense for you. You don't have to understand the science, you don't have to understand the details. What you have to understand is enough to make informed decisions and then justify those decisions where you need to. So that's the level you can expect today, because I am not qualified to give you anything else. So for me, what was really helpful in wrapping my head around AI, wrapping my head around why was this going to be relevant for Congress, is understanding that AI is actually a big bucket category term. AI is a broad category for a field of study, field of research, field of development in software and tech and math that attempts to approximate the cognitive capacity of the human brain. It is genuinely that simple. So some of the aspects of human cognition that we're getting close on, and that's really driven this AI boom, this wave of AI excitement in the last few years, include some of the subsets under that big category. So you'll hear about machine learning, the ability for these tools, these programs, software to learn on their own. So instead of me having to teach a program all of the rules that I want it to use in analyzing use in analyzing data, giving it that data and saying, hey, figure out the rules for yourself. It's also things like recognition, like facial recognition, character recognition, pattern recognition. We're still a little bit far off here, but also getting toward reasoning, how to think through logical steps the way a human would. Prediction is a really big piece of where this technology is right now. And it's a really big piece that you may not realize is actually what's powering some of the commonly commercially available tools like ChatGPT, some of the other large language models. And then getting toward recombination, things that start to feel creative. How can I take things from different places and recombine them in new ways to generate something new? So I hope that's helpful. Just even that baseline understanding is already enough to start asking questions when you have a sense that maybe something sounds like bullshit. So saying, once you see something that says powered by AI, or this is built on AI, being able to drill down just a little bit and say, okay, but what is it actually doing? What is the function? What is the analytical capacity that you're asking this technology to bring to the table here? Something else that's important to note is that there are big categories of AI. The commercially available stuff like ChatGPT, Claude, Bing, Bard, all of the ones with stupid names, those are generative AI. So that is being trained on a data set. How can you generate new text, generate new images? That it stands in contrast to AI models that work on a more discriminative or analytical capacity. That's the kind of AI, and we're going to talk about this more in a second, but that's the kind of AI that you're going to see in places like the Department of Veterans Affairs, saying, given a data set of past decisions, how can an AI model be trained to look at new cases and give kind of a first draft decision?
No idea.
What happens here? Does that make sense? Questions before I move on?
Sure does. Thank you.
Good, thank you. I'm really glad. Okay.
Joking on my lunch, sorry.
You're good. Thanks so much. And stop me if you do have questions. Again, we've got time, we've got space to just make sure that this is clear. Cool. Okay. So one other thing that I think is important just for level setting for you, where is AI right now, is just understanding that, yes, in December of 2022, ChatGPT burst onto the scene. I was with my team in person at the time where we all started playing with it. It was absolutely fascinating. This technology has actually been around for quite some time. So the fundamental, like some of the fundamental technology that this is built on dates back to the 1960s, and it's been a field of study ever since, which means that AI has been used in government for decades. Some of these use cases you may be more familiar with than others. For example, the Congressional Budget Office uses AI tools in its predictive modeling, figuring out the impact of a bill, a piece of legislation. We also saw this a lot in COVID, in modeling how the pandemic would, how cases would rise in the pandemic, how the pandemic would respond to different interventions. A lot of AI modeling from the CDC. Lastly, this has been used a ton in the private sector. If you've done mobile check deposit with your bank and been surprised by how your bank software can read handwriting, that's optical character recognition that, again, is one little subset under that big category of AI. So anyone who's claiming to you that this is magic, this is brand new, keep in mind, again, level set. This isn't new. This is just an iteration of what's been done before. Okay, so focusing a little bit, because I do want to make sure we're focused on the stuff that's available to you today to play with, to use, to think about how to integrate into your casework. So we're going to talk just for a second about the technology behind things like large language models. So when you hear ChatGPT, GPT actually does stand for something. It's generative pre-trained transformer. And I am a visual learner, so the picture makes this easier for me, even though I understand it can look really confusing. Basically, this is what ChatGPT is doing and how ChatGPT works. So generative, that's your output layer. So ChatGPT is generating new text for you. Pre-trained, that's the thing that makes this tick. So when we talk about pre-training and what is ChatGPT trained on, these large language models truly do need trillions and trillions of data points to work. So model is trained on basically all the text OpenAI can get their hands on from the entire internet. Some of the other models are trained on different data sources, like Facebook's is trained on everything you've ever written on Facebook, which is a horrifying thing to think about, but hey, it's why it's really good at approximating human language. So pre-trained, so it takes that whole corpus of everything that's been written and it's tweaked. So that it's tweaked, it's massaged so that when I prompt it, when I write something in the text box for ChatGPT, we can actually play with this right now. So this is my input. So that's my input. That's going to go into ChatGPT's pre-trained, again, massive corpus of data, and it's going to give me the output. So that's the transformer. So it's transforming my input, running it through that huge corpus of data, and then giving me an output. What makes this different from a search engine is that from my input, so again, what I wrote here to ChatGPT, please explain how AI works for a non-technical audience, 100 words or less. Instead of where a search engine would weight each of those words individually, ChatGPT, the tech behind ChatGPT is able to say, hey, there are certain words here that are more important than others, and there is real value and meaning created by their relationship to each other and their order in this sentence. So then understanding that gives me something that I can take away to predict what you want here. So ChatGPT is not reasoning. It is not saying, wow, let me consider how to explain how AI works. It's saying, these are words that are more or less probably associated with each other. Looking at all the words I have in my data bank, I can see other words that are more probably associated with these words. And then I can translate that into, this is probably what you're looking for. This is the sequence of probability of words showing up next to each other that you want. Does that make sense? More or less?
It sure does.
Cool. Thank you so much, AJ. Awesome. So given that, again, our goal here is a baseline understanding that's going to help you ask smart questions, make informed decisions. There are a couple of things that are really important for you to know on how this works. First is the more training data the model has, or the more specific the training data is to what you're asking it to do, the better your output is going to be. So if you've heard about hallucinations as a danger of using AI models, hallucination is just when a model makes something up. Problem is that it gives you that thing it's made up as confidently as something that's real. Hallucinations tend to happen more when the model doesn't have good data. So it starts to kind of go toward the edges of probability and put things together that seem likely, but probably aren't what you were looking for. Same thing, we just touched on this again really briefly, but even though this looks like just a conscious reasoning intelligence that is answering you the way I would answer you if you asked me a question, again, this is looking at language as a vast network of probabilities, so it doesn't understand truth the way that we do. All it understands is probability and predictability. Other big thing to note is that as you're interacting with these models, you are continuing to train them. So anything in that training data, anything that the model has been trained on can potentially come back out later. I'm going to talk about risk there when we get into how to use these tools in casework, but something to keep in mind. And then also that just these, there are some emergent properties here that make these models act really strangely sometimes. And one of the things that I find so fascinating is that you can't step into the same AI twice. If I give this model the same prompt on 2 different days, it's going to spit back out a different answer both times. Hopefully both still good answers, but a little bit different. And that's because in the time between those two, when I prompt it each time, other people are continuing to train the model. Other people are prompting, other people are giving the model feedback on what it gives them that they like. And so the model changes. The model is constantly changing. So again, it's never going to be quite the same. You're never going to get quite the same answer twice. And then let's talk about bias. This is always the question I get when I'm talking to people about AI. Oh, more waiting room. And it's something that I think is worth keeping in mind, but maybe isn't as scary as some people make it sound. So bias is, you can think about it like a very simple equation. Bias is, let's say, the x times y equals z, where x is the training data that the model is trained on, y is the prompting that you give it to come up with an output, and then z is the output. So if I give a model biased data and then ask it an unbiased prompt, it's probably going to give me a biased output. If I give the model unbiased data and then I ask it a biased prompt, it's still probably going to give me a biased outcome. What's important is that you can tweak this. You can tweak it in your prompting, you can tweak it in how you train your model. So I have the visual here from OpenAI, or sorry, not OpenAI, from Google's Gemini image release. Did anybody see this as a news story? Know what was going on here? So basically what happened was Google wanted to release a new image generator. They got in trouble on their first image generator because it was trained on basically everything that you're going to come up with in Google Images. Huge data set of every image that's ever been created, more or less, except the good trademarked ones. If that data set, let's say data set that's images that are tagged as American woman, if that data set had more white women than women of color, then it is more likely that the model, when you asked it, give me an image of an American woman, was going to spit out an image of a white woman. So Google got in trouble before, and people claiming there was bias in what it was generating in its image generator. So when Google got ready to release its second one, they said, we don't want that. We're going to avoid this political controversy. So basically what it did is it quietly, whenever you gave it a prompt, it quietly added a second prompt to what you asked for. So if I said, give me an image of an American woman, it would say, and also please, don't do any images of things that are harmful, don't do any images of things that are violent or illegal or whatever, and also make sure that your output reflects the diversity of the American life. What that meant was that when people asked for things like, for example, generate me an image of senators from the 1800s, Google's model very dutifully said, okay, this isn't violent, this isn't illegal, whatever. And also I'm going to make sure that the generation here reflects the vast diversity of the American fabric. Again, we've come back to this, that these models don't reason the way we do. So the model was following its prompting instructions, just not exactly the way that we intended. Does that make sense as an explanation of bias? Questions before I move on here? Seeing a couple thumbs up. Cool. Okay. So again, be aware of bias, but understand that it is something that you can control. All right. So zooming out for just a second, like I said, I think it's important for all legislative staffers, for legislatures themselves, but specifically for caseworkers to just think about balancing the micro and the macro here. So not just how can AI tools be useful in your work, but also what is the big picture? What is the impact? What are the stakes? Why does this matter? And again, I know most of you have been to multiple of our webinars. It's great to see you again. If you're new here, welcome. But I want to take a step back for just a second and talk a little bit about POPVOX Foundation and our role here. So we are completely nonpartisan 501c3 organization. We are all former staffers. We do not care whether your bosses regulate AI or not. I really don't care. I don't have a dog in the fight over whether you regulate AI, whether you use AI. Our purpose is in thinking about, as legislatures meet this moment, do they have the tools that they need? So when OpenAI, ChatGPT burst onto the scene, we immediately started thinking, what does Congress need to be able to respond the way it wants to? What do members of Congress, what do your bosses need to exercise the will of the people effectively, no matter what that will is? So we identified 5 big places where we think AI is going to impact legislatures. The bottom 3 I've starred because I think this is really where casework shines. But we'll go through them really quickly. And one way to think about this is we always refer back to the pacing problem for POPVOX Foundation, that the pace of technological change goes like this. If you've ever tried to get anything done in Congress, you know that the pace of political change goes like this. And eventually you end up with that gap. And that gap is really scary for democracy because that's where Congress cannot effectively exercise the will of the people. And it can't do that in a couple of levels: on its relationship to external society, on its relationship to to other branches. Again, you'll see this is where casework comes in. And then internally, does it have the capacity it needs to interface with constituents the way that they expect to do its job? So again, where does this impact you? How does this impact you? The first thing to say is that it probably already is, that casework absorbs the impact of these big societal shifts. You may already be getting calls about from scam victims who are falling for scams that are built on AI like really convincing AI impersonations. Caseworkers who've been around for quite some time and may have been through the 2008 recession will tell you when there's a big economic shift, eventually that shows up in casework, in unemployment benefits, in Social Security, disability benefits, that all go up when people lose their jobs. So thinking about the economic impact, thinking about the crime, the criminal impact, all of this, again, eventually finds its way into casework. And we've mentioned this a couple of times, but this is the really big one. Again, if you're like me and you're saying, I'm ignoring AI until someone makes me stop ignoring AI, the federal agencies are already using AI in their work. So the VA is already using AI, some discriminative AI tools to start doing initial benefit decisions for PACT Act stuff. So that's where you are, again, the canary in the coal mine of saying, how is this impacting my constituents? Do my constituents understand it? Are they comfortable with it? Are they benefiting from faster decisions? Is the appeals process getting clogged up because people don't like the idea of an AI decision? So you are the ones with the really in-depth implementation expertise to say, this is the impact of AI in governing. And that's really important. And then the last 2 things here are just legislating is a business. You are undoubtedly about to be sold, if you're not already, getting inundated with sales calls about, hey, there's this new tool, and it's AI powered, and it's basically magic, and it's going to do casework for you, it's going to do this for you, it's going to do that for you. So you're, as a responsible steward of public funding, you need to build up a bullshit filter, saying, again, Where is AI actually useful? Where is it not useful? Where am I actually being sold something that's going to help my capacity? Where am I being sold a bill of goods? And I include the two headlines on the right just to say that Congress as a whole, and it should be, is a risk-averse institution. Congress is the steward of sensitive data. The stakes for Congress getting it wrong are high. But when I hear congressional staff always say to me, well, we handle really sensitive data, so there's no way we could use AI. I just want to say the NSA is using AI, and the intelligence community is using AI, just recognizing that it is a trade-off, that there are ways to use this responsibly with sensitive information in a way that still lets teams augment their capacity. So yes, Congress should be risk averse. You should have that bullshit filter. That bullshit filter should be turned on high, but there are ways to make it work. And then lastly, again, as Congress is a business, Congress is also a labor workforce. At some point, we would likely expect AI to change the nature of legislative work. And I really don't want folks to go back to their offices and say that I said that, AI is going to replace caseworkers, you're going to lose your job. I do not think that's what's going to happen. But I do think eventually these tools will augment capacity. They will take some of the drudgery and the lower level tasks out of congressional work. And that does change things like the pipeline. That changes who's coming into Congress, what's the entry level role for Congress, what does an internship to Congress look like if you're not answering phones, if you're not doing some of those menial tasks. But then also for caseworkers, where does the work that really contributes to burnout go? I think there's some exciting things here, and also just, as with any industry, some things to keep an eye on. Make sense? Questions before we move on? Cool. All right. Oh, hang on, just seeing stuff in the chat. Perfect. Awesome. Thanks so much. Wonderful. Okay. So I promised we are going to get to the good stuff. We're going to talk about just the rules for playing with these tools and what's out there. So let's talk a little bit about just where are we for Congress. You're a congressional staffer, you're intrigued by LLMs, you want us to play around with this. What's going on? And who's in charge here? And the thing that brings me so much joy is we never get to say that Congress is ahead on things, but on AI, we do genuinely get to say that. Congress was the first democratic legislature in the world, again, small d democratic legislature, to issue internal responsible use guidance for AI tools. So it was the first one to say to its staff, hey, we see potential here, but we want to be aware of the risks. So here are some guardrails. Now go forth and experiment. And that's pretty cool. Other legislatures around the world looked to Congress to say, hey, how do I write rules like this? So we never get to say that Congress isn't late yet, which is really exciting. So what Congress actually did, the House went first. So a couple months after ChatGPT was released, the House issued guidance that said, hey, we understand that you want to use this stuff. Looking at our internet usage, we can see that many of you are already trying this. So here's how you can do it safely. Only use ChatGPT from OpenAI, the paid version. The paid version lets you turn on a feature that doesn't submit your data back to its training model. And don't use it for sensitive information, only use it for non-sensitive data, and only use it for research and analysis. Great, super workable set of guidance. And then, and then the cool thing was that House Digital Services, I'm curious if any of your offices got one of their licenses, but they actually bought 40 licenses and gave them out to offices to say, we want to know how you would use this. So like, here's a license. Your only price for entry here is telling us what you're doing with it. I'm going to skip over this really fast, but just to say on the who's in charge here question, Committee on House Administration and the Chief Administrative Officer. There is a GAO detailee who's an AI expert who's on staff for CHA. She's the one kind of leading the charge on thinking about how can AI work in the legislative branch writ large. So how can all legislative branch entities, CRS, CBO, all that good stuff, GPO, all that good stuff, how are they thinking about AI and what does each one need to be able to implement AI stuff together? So some really cool stuff happening. You may have seen a couple of full committee hearings in the House and Senate, both, again, about how to use AI in the legislative branch. Again, this is more like the weedsy institutional stuff like GPO and Library of Congress rather than how should caseworkers use this. But still, again, Congress is on top of things, and that's really exciting. A few months after the House went first, we did achieve interbranch parity. I don't know if I have any Senate caseworkers here, but The Senate was later with issuing its own guidance, but its guidance was also looser. So in the House, only ChatGPT paid version has been approved. In the Senate, you have your choice. You can use OpenAI's ChatGPT, you can use Google's Bard, you can use Microsoft's Bing. I will say we are hearing that it is likely that there will be additional guidance out soon. We've been hearing that soon should be soon for a couple of months, so I don't know exactly when that will be, but just to keep an eye on announcements that there may be some additional guidance soon. And then lastly, again, there have been experiments with some AI training. This is one of them, hosted by third parties, hosted by civil society. Again, I hear that some of the parties are working on their own trainings too. So if you are more likely to get a good training in how to use AI for your job through one of the parties rather than through Congressional Staff Academy right now. But again, that may change as we head into a new Congress. So definitely something to keep an eye on. So that's where we are. So that's who's in charge and that's what the rules are. Cool? Good. All right. So I keep promising we're going to get to the good stuff. So this is the actual meat of things here. So again, my team has worked on AI a lot. So as we are talking to congressional staffers and asking, hey, have you used this? How would you use this? This is the current list of use cases for AI, for LLM tools, commercially available tools we have seen in Congress. So I'm going to just take a quick look at this. And if there's something in particular you want us to demo or you want to talk through how you would do this, keep it in mind. I am going to talk a little bit more about the rules and some best practices, and then we are going to do some demos. So if there's something that you see, drop it in the chat or just keep it in mind to shout out later. Okay. There are a couple of steps to doing this responsibly. Again, we've talked about the chamber-specific limitations. Your first step, which chamber are you in and what's approved for your chamber? Is there a specific tool that you want to use? Are there specific use cases you want to be using this for? Step 2 is about your office. Does your office have an additional guardrail policy in place that goes above and beyond your chamber's limitations? If you do not, and you want to establish a policy, there are 3 things that go into establishing an internal policy. And this is just a screenshot from a more in-depth guide to developing an AI policy that is up on our website. I will be happy to share that if helpful. Well, let's walk through those quickly. First is privacy and risk. So when we were talking about how these tools work, we said that anything that you put in as a prompt can come back out later in its training data. Again, the approved versions of these tools all have features where you can turn that off. However, as a former caseworker, I would still err on the side of caution with sensitive data. So my rule of thumb would be never, ever, ever put constituent PII into a Gen AI tool. I would also say the same thing about whistleblower information and any other privileged or confidential information. There are ways to work around this. Instead of a name, you can just put in a fake name. You can blank out that name, Mr. X. There are ways to do this fairly easily. I would also avoid putting identifiable member information in. Again, instead of asking, please write me a speech in the voice of Representative Marcy Harris, my boss, I would say, please write a speech in the style of a member with a background in computer science who is from the Northeast. Like there are ways to kind of mask any identifiable information that you may want to drop in here. And then make a plan for how your team will verify any information that comes out of ChatGPT or any of these other tools. Talk about that more in a second. Okay. So again, rule of thumb. So we talked about privacy and risk and talking about appropriate use. Where and when should you use these tools? Again, guiding principle for me is that output from these tools should be treated like your best intern or your best early career staff assistant, early career somebody. They are going to give you any written output with perfect grammar. It's going to sound super confident. They're going to be able to mimic the tone really well. They don't have the context that you do. So anything needs verified. So you need to have a plan to fact check anything that you get out of these. And then also helpful to just think about where do we want, again, where would you use an intern to help you create a first draft of something and think about plugging in there. So for example, your team might say, we are comfortable using LLMs for internal documents only. You can use this as a first draft or the weekly report that goes to the member. You can use this to first draft your email to your chief of staff asking for vacation policy, asking for vacation time, whatever. But we don't use this in emails to stakeholders and constituent correspondence, whatever. It's also important, I think, to maybe have some wiggle room to say there might be levels of importance that say to staff, hey, just use your best judgment here. So when I'm talking to legislative staffers, the example is, is this a vote recommendation on the boss's huge priority issue? Is this a vote recommendation on something that's going to pass anyway that the boss doesn't really care about? Maybe you'd use an LLM to first draft you the second one, but not the first. Another thing I think teams are going to want to think about is a blanket policy on whether or not image generation is acceptable. Can you use DALL-E or one of the other image generators to come up with illustrations for PSAs, social media posts? I think the ethics around that are a little bit more complicated than around text generation. And then this is the big one, and something I'm really thinking about, hearing about a lot. So if you have strong feelings here, I'd love to hear about them. But the biggest thing that I hear from legislative staff in general when thinking about, can I use AI? Can I use these generative AI tools is, well, but my constituents won't trust it, or my constituents will be angry if they think that I used one of these tools to first draft something to them. I don't necessarily think it's about trust. I think it's about feelings. I think it's less people are worried about a constituent not trusting it and more that they don't want that constituent to think that they didn't merit the time. So I think it's important for us to just be specific in what our hesitations are. But again, this is something I'm thinking about a ton. If you have strong feelings, I'd love to hear about it. The important thing, just again, for thinking about a policy here is thinking about how comfortable are you sharing the why behind your work. So if your team does allow the use of LLMs for first drafting emails to constituents, just think about how you would explain that to a constituent. Say, hey, it's important to us that we serve as many people as possible. These shave off 2 minutes per email. Therefore, we know that we can be more responsive. Just think about what will resonate with your constituents in explaining your own capacity and explaining your decisions and explaining your guardrails, explaining this is how we think about risk. We never put this kind of information in. We always fact check this. Just being able to, again, understand the technology enough to make informed decisions, justify those decisions. Does that make sense? Questions? Questions so far? Cool. Okay, so I promised you we would play with some of these models. So did anyone have one of those from my list that they really wanted us to play around with? Not, I have a couple we can do. Okay, let's jump into one. So in our casework, oh, hang on, let me check the chat. Notes from a phone call with a constituent. Yes, beautiful. Okay, let's dive into that one then. So, and again, I'm going to use a couple of different AI tools here. Some of these are not as of yet approved by the House or the Senate, but again, they're fairly well substantiated tools that I use every day in my day-to-day, and I suspect that they will be updated in future guidance. So just a caveat for what I'm doing, and I'll talk you through what I am doing. So this is Otter AI. This is a transcription service. There is a free version. I use it all the time to transcribe phone calls, transcribe webinars. If you ever see a transcript from one of our Casework Navigator webinars, you can be assured that Otter did it. It's actually really good. So a couple of weeks ago, I pretended to be a constituent and called and recorded my message.
Hi, Representative Brown. This is Ann Meeker from Hiram, Ohio. I know I sent in all my paperwork about the issue that I'm having with Social Security, but I just wanted to give you a call to let you know there are some updates in my case. So I got a call from Social Security this afternoon saying that they still aren't getting the information about my wages. And I just don't understand what else they could possibly want at this point. I've sent in my pay stubs, I've sent in my timesheets. I just don't understand how they're confused about what I'm getting paid. And they're still telling me that I have this massive overpayment, and I'm really worried that they're going to start taking my checks. I'm on the edge of being evicted right now. My landlord's going to give me one more chance. So I really hope that you can do something to help me out with this. If you want to give me a call back, I'd really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Bye.
I'm so sorry if that was triggering for anyone. Just been getting so many voicemails that sound exactly the same. But the point is, so if you've ever used a transcription service in the past, they've gotten a lot better. So this is actually a really decent transcript for what I sent in. So what I do from here is literally I can just copy and paste this in and then come over to ChatGPT. And what would we do from this? Do we just want a summary from these notes? Okay. Because this is just a sample and this is entirely a fake, I'm not going to go ahead and mask the PII here. But again, if you wanted to, you could just say, this is, hi, this is constituent X. Cool. So then ChatGPT is going to give me actually a really good quick summary that I could really easily paste into CRM. I could add into a voicemail note that I took for somebody else. And it's even giving me the urgency and it's giving me a suggestion for follow-up. So then what we could do from there even, yeah, it's really impressive. It honestly is. And even just in the last couple of years, showing the different, watching the difference and watching how these models have evolved, they have gotten so much better so fast. So what we can even do from there is please write first draft of a short confirmation email of this constituent to let them know that we received their call and will be reaching out to SSA immediately. They should wait for further updates. Now it's going to draft a pretty solid first pass email. Dear constituent, thank you for reaching out, providing updates. Confirmation, we got this. This is professional and good. I will say something that we've started saying on our team. Let me just check that my intern didn't join. All right. What we said for interns on our team is that there are no longer any excuses to give me written work product that has spelling and grammar errors at this point. We fully authorize our interns on our team to use these tools. If I see something in spelling and grammar, when I know that they could have just thrown this into ChatGPT and had it edit it quickly, I'm pretty upset. So if that's helpful, that's really been something that's been helpful for us. And then again, we can just take this and do the next step. Please draft urgent inquiry to Social Security readiness constituents concerns. So again, this is a pretty good first pass. This is something that you would still want to edit. So for example, here, I know the rule, I don't know about your offices, but the rule of thumb in my office was always just to frame a constituent's, what we heard from a constituent as just that, as what we heard from a constituent. Constituent has communicated to us that they have attempted to submit all of their stuff. They're still, here's what they're getting. So just, there are things that I would tweak here. So it's pretty good. It's 90% of the way there. It might save me 50% of the time in drafting because I still have to go back and edit this to just meet our team standards. But it's pretty good. Is that helpful? Anything else that you would do on this one? Any questions about just first drafting constituent input? Check the chat. Cool. Yeah, this stuff can be really fun. Cool. Okay. Let me show you another couple. So in our Casework Navigator newsletter that you may have received yesterday, you'll see, and again, we're back to it for the September legislative session, we usually include a list of casework related hearings. So hearings in the committees of jurisdiction that focus on some topic that has relevance to casework. We always include those so that with as much lead time as we can give you, you can flag if you have a relevant case for your boss, or you can pay attention because you might hear something that's going to impact how you engage with the agency. However, I recognize these hearings are long, and that is a huge time commitment. So what I do when there are hearings that I'm interested in, again, for the same reasons, can I put them into the Navigator newsletter? Is there something I want to follow up with the agency on? Is I literally go to YouTube, and so under most YouTube videos of hearings, if you pull down the kind of more information under the video itself, you'll see the transcript, and there's a button that says show transcript. So here's just YouTube's basic transcript of this hearing. And I will say it's not nearly as good as Otter's, but it's a basic transcript. So I will literally copy and paste this whole thing. And I'm picking this one because it's a relatively short hearing, but so we'll see these tools can actually handle a pretty solid amount of text. So I just copied and pasted that. So for this one, I'm going to use Claude, and Claude is not on the list of approved software for the House or Senate right now. I think it probably will be soon. Again, this is the one that I use most frequently. Literally what I'm going to do is just paste this in here. And I'm going to say, please provide a summary in bullet points of this hearing. This summary should include key questions from each member, new information from witnesses, and some suggested action steps for my boss to take in response to this hearing. Anything else you would want to know from a hearing? Any other questions I can include in the prompt here? Cool, then let's start there. So again, just paste it in the raw, ugly, gross, inaccurate text, or fairly inaccurate text from YouTube. And Claude is taking that ugly text and it's saying, okay, I recognize what a summary should be. I recognize that this is the format that you're asking for. And here's the things that you've requested. So here's a summary of the hearing, key questions. So again, if I didn't say this was a hearing in the Senate Aging Committee on ensuring government tech is accessible, super relevant for casework all over the place. Key questions: Senator Scott highlighted issues of VA's digital transition. Senator Fetterman shared personal experience with accessibility. And then here are my bullet points from the witnesses. So this looks good. This is a solid set of action steps. If I was going to send this to, let's say, a colleague in the on the ledge team, I might also ask it, please provide a short one-paragraph prose summary. Please provide a short one-paragraph prose summary at the top. Again, same memo. Here's a summary paragraph. And the thing I want to emphasize here is that, again, like working with a super talented intern, you're probably not going to get exactly what you want on the first pass. So key to just really learning how to do this well, how to get the most out of these tools, is figuring out how to just keep asking it and refining and refining and refining. What are you looking for? Even being as specific as, please rewrite this paragraph with shorter sentences. Like you can, it's kind of, for me, it's a little bit of a mind flip to just figure out how to be specific in what I want, like describing characteristics of writing that meets my team style, that meets my style, isn't always really easy. But it is really helpful for just figuring out how to get the most out of these. So again, this is pretty pretty short sentences the first time, so this is starting to sound a little choppy, but helpful for what I need it for. And then again, we can even go further. Can you suggest some tweets from this hearing? So again, you can start to say, maybe this is really helpful for working with my team. You can say, I identified this hearing as something that's relevant to my casework portfolio. You could use one of these tools to suggest some questions for the record, or if your boss is on this committee, some questions that you might want to ask based on those constituent stories. You can summarize the hearing when it happens. You can suggest some tweets for your comms team to just close that loop, make sure everything just comes full circle. Make sense? Any other questions? Any other specific use cases that you'd want to dive into? I have tons of these, if not. Cool. Let me show you one other one then that I think is really fun. So this is starting to get just a little bit more into the weeds on what you can do with these tools with a little bit of legwork to set them up the way that you want them to be set up. So again, as you may be familiar, on our Casework Navigator page, we have a ton of casework manual chapters that are intended to be fairly comprehensive, but still starting points for teams to adapt, to add in their own nuances, their own operating procedures, just what works for you, but it's a good starting point to think about what's helpful. Again, recognizing the flaws in my own work product, they are super long and there's a lot of them, and they are kind of stored in different places. So I can't just search one Casework Navigator chapter. I have to go find the one that I'm looking for. So what we've been playing with, and what anyone can do here, is thinking about how to basically put guardrails on what one of these tools is looking at to say, in giving me your output, I only want you to focus on this small subset of information. So this is for OpenAI. Anyone can create a custom GPT. So that's what this is. So hang on, let me zoom around here. So again, I am in my team's general OpenAI paid account. So coming over here to look at my GPTs. So these are the ones that we've been playing with. So when I'm looking at our Casework Navigator one, I said, what I would like here is for any new caseworker to be able to interact with my casework manual and ask it questions. So what we did here is we said, okay, we're going to create a custom GPT called the Casework Navigator GPT. I'm going to, first of all, name it and tell it what I want it to do. And then I'm going to give it instructions. Well, first, I'm going to upload the knowledge base that I want it to use. So I uploaded our entire Casework Navigator manual, all of the chapters that we've written, and said, this is what I want you to focus on. This is called retrieval augmented generation, by the way, if you want to sound really fancy in talking to people about how AI works. So again, so these are all of the chapters that I wanted it to focus on. Retrieval augmented generation, these are the only things I want you to use when you're providing me answers. And then I gave it some instructions. So I said, this GPT is designed to act as an experienced congressional casework mentor. It's going to give guidance. It's going to give best practices. It will avoid, I'm giving it guardrails. It will avoid giving it political opinions or advice. It will stick strictly to procedure and operational aspects. If it doesn't understand the question, it will ask for clarification. And it focuses on the structure and process of casework, not agency-specific inquiries. So I'm telling it, only focus on only focus on these documents and only give responses like this. So then you can do things like, can you give me tips for working with my legislative team? So then as a normal caseworker, I can ask this questions knowing that I'm taking some of the risk out. It's not looking at the entire internet for thinking about how to give me advice on doing casework. It's only looking at this source that I've identified that I trust. Does that make sense? Questions? So again, anyone can do this. If you have an internal office manual and an office OpenAI account, you can set this up. It is super easy. It's really fun to play around with. Yeah, so that's retrieval augmented generation. And again, this is all based on the information that we've provided in that manual. It's just written in a different format, and it's bringing some things together differently that I didn't put together in those original manual chapters. And again, this lets you get pretty creative in what you're asking it for. So for example, this is helpful, but I need more specifics. Can you suggest managing collaboration with my legislative team? Oh, Gina, good question. So how does an AI create a member's voice for correspondence? Good question. So it's kind of, It depends. So for example, if I wanted to create a GPT that could reliably replicate my member's voice, I would configure this by dropping into its knowledge base here, everything that I could give it that was written in my member's voice. And then when I'm giving it the instructions, I would say, please replicate this particular voice, and maybe give it some more specifics. So this member tends to be more positive. This member is from this party. So please, make sure that we're echoing the party line on these things. This member's priority is XYZ. This member is also a Browns fan, so please, include Browns jokes where you can. I say as a Clevelander, and that will help you really kind of get close to that member's voice. If you are just ChatGPT not using retrieval augmented generation, then it's probably guessing for what a member voice should sound like from what's in its training data. So how many member letters from members are available on the internet, and what is it extrapolating about the appropriate tone, the appropriate content from everything that's out there? Gina, does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Cool. Oh, hang on, I've lost my chat window here somehow. Popping off screen share. Okay, perfect. All right. Let me go back to sharing for 1 second because there is something else I just want to make sure that we cover here. All right, can everybody see that again? Great. Okay. So I want to just give a really specific example of some kind of things that you'd want to look out for in thinking about how you'd want to fact check, how you'd want to just be aware of what, just kind of have your antennae up when you're looking at things you're getting back from ChatGPT. So this is an example that I did a while ago. You may have seen this in our casework guide, casework and AI guide. So one thing that, again, understanding that these models are trained on the vast corpus of data of the internet, something that sometimes that's really helpful for just a quick read on something. For example, if you're a new caseworker, you are your third day on the job, you answer the phone and a constituent starts rattling off a program that you have no idea how it works. So this would be something where, and I can remember having to go to 15 different sources to figure out what voc rehab was when I was a new VA caseworker. This would be something where I would think about using ChatGPT to say, hey, I just need a short overview, one source, while I'm on the phone with this constituent, what on earth is voc rehab and what's its eligibility criteria? What's the process? What do I need to know right now? So that's what I asked it for. And this is what came back. So again, my prompt here, please search the web to write a short overview of the voc rehab program. The summary will be used to educate new caseworkers, blah, blah, blah. So here's just a couple of things to flag that it came back with. So again, ChatGPT is trained on the vast corpus of the internet. The voc rehab, well, what I still call voc rehab, what most veterans still call voc rehab, the name of it has changed. So what's on the internet is mostly going to use the old name, which means that ChatGPT spit out the old name. So just good to know that it was still giving me a little bit of outdated information because this has been renamed in the meantime. Couple things where I wanted clarification. So I asked it to give me the application process and it said veterans can apply for voc rehab benefits through the local VA office. This is true. This is not incorrect, but it's not the whole story. Veterans are also able to apply online, and I would have liked some more information on what they needed to do to apply online so that I didn't accidentally send a veteran in person to the VA office when they didn't need to go. Does that make sense? And then again, some small errors here, like this form number is correct, but the title is not. So just little tiny places where this is 90% good, but just me as a caseworker getting duty to give the most accurate information I can to constituents while serving as many as possible, as quickly as possible. There are some trade-offs. Cool. All right. Are there any other questions? Any other use cases we want to talk through as we're coming to the end of our time here? All right. Let me just wrap up with a couple last tips here. Okay. We went through a couple of these a little bit, but just as you are experimenting, couple of tips on how to get the most out of this kind of thing. Again, Be specific. That might include things like give it a word count. Do you want it really short? Don't just tell it super short. I want 100 words or fewer. Give it the audience. This is for my manager. This is for the members review, or this is for, I'm speaking at a civics class about what can Congress do for you on Tuesday. Be super, super specific. Also, things like bullet points versus prose and really be helpful. Use headings, use subheadings can really be helpful in just making sure it gives you what you need. There's some weird ways to make the model work better that we don't exactly understand why it works that way, but sometimes asking it to think step by step or giving it the importance of something. So saying, hey, this is really this is the most exciting thing I've worked on all year, and I really hope you do a good job with it. For some reason, that makes it spit out better answers. This has been really well documented. No one can quite tell you why it works that way, but it's worth just trying. And as we said, reprompt is necessary. Try again if you don't like what it comes out with the first time, and then check and recheck your details. And lastly, again, this has been a learning process. Like we said, my team just had a meeting on Monday to just share how has our internal use of these tools evolved over the last couple of years, and we are very much still in the learning curve. Everyone is in this learning curve together. So if you put in your first couple of prompts and you're like, I don't love this, what's the hype here? Keep in mind there are actual full-time paid jobs for prompt engineers, people whose whole job is to figure out how to prompt these these tools. So this is a skill. This is a learned skill that's going to take a little bit of time. So definitely don't give up on it if you think it's something that can really genuinely make a difference in your work. So let me just go ahead and close there. And I will say, again, we have a specific guide to using AI tools in casework that's up on our website. I will email this out afterwards. My team is super excited in hearing about how are you using these tools. So if you find a cool way to use them that works in your office, please, please, please circle back and let me know. I love hearing about these examples. And again, they're super helpful for us in figuring out what kind of guidance can we put out in the future and what kind of feedback can we help relay to CAO, to CHA, about what the formal internal guidance should look like, and the Senate side as well, what should that formal internal guidance look like in the future. So again, thank you all so much for coming today. Lovely to see familiar faces again. Again, I hope everyone's hanging in there to get into the September legislative session, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much, everyone.